Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and we welcome you back again to this new series that we're doing about the emergence of Islam, and the angle what we're taking, of course, will be a critical assessment of that. And we began last episode by introducing the work of our dear brother and friend Dan Gibson, and today Dr. J. Smith here with me in studio will continue to unpack that for us about the background of Dan Gibson and the work that he has done as it relates to the history of Islam and the emergence of Islam. Dan, Jay, welcome.
Not quite Dan yet.
That's right.
I'd love to have his mind and behalf to his experience, but what we do know about Dan Gibson is that he is a archaeologist. He is what archaeologists should be and should do. He did what all archaeologists should do, like the Indiana Jones example that I gave in the last episode. What we do know is that because of this realization that much of what was being the repository of the oral tradition were so embellished and were changing between two individuals within a 15-minute period, he realized that he had to be careful of what he considered to be historically accurate. And so that's why he decided to go back to, first of all, with this book here. He wanted to go back to this book and look at it from a historical standpoint. But he wanted to look at it looking at the geography to begin with. Now, he wanted to, and his dictum was always this: let's look at the evidence on the ground. Once you see the evidence on the ground,
right,
then get it out, get it into books or get it into documentaries, get it out into the world so people could read it, come across it, and then assess it. Come out with some type of assessment of what you have found, and then wait for the responses. So he wanted to do that, and that's the thing he did. Now, what I want to do is I want to look, just put up on the screen, the books that he came up with and the one documentary. These are them right there. So in 2003, he came out with the Nabateans, builders of Petra. Now, who are the Nabateans? Do you know who they are?
Well, I mean, that's where we have Petra, of course, but supposedly, from what I'm, my own research right now, that they are the ones that where the Arabic language came from.
That's right. And so the Nabateans,
they're a dynasty in of itself.
Exactly. And they are the ones from which not only Arabic came from, but as we're going to find out, where their God came from and also possibly where this book came from.
Right.
But he didn't know that when he started. So that was back in 2003 that he wrote this book. Now that he's coming across all this material, that came out in 2003. We're going to unpack that a little bit and look and see what his conclusions were from that book. We'll do that next. Then in 2011, on the right out there, you'll see Quranic geography. That was the one that really probably took many people by surprise. Because he went one step further from Nabateans, and he says, hold on a minute, now let's look at this book, the Quran. And when you look at the Quran, the geography that's in the Quran, 9 different geographical locations, but 65 references to geographical, but in 9 locations, do not fit Mecca, do not fit the Hijaz, do not fit the central part of Arabia. They fit a place much, much further north.
That's right.
That you've already referred to. In Jordan.
That's right, which is Petra.
In Petra.
Right.
600 miles further north. That he came out with in
And I want to encourage people to go to our previous series that I did, me and Dr. J. Smith, called The Unknown History of Islam, because we unpack that.
Okay. Then he came out in 2016 with the book that we see on the screen there. Not the book. That is a documentary called The Sacred City.
That's right. I watched that too, and I encourage people to watch it.
It has gone viral. In India, over 1 million people have watched that. This is really, it has taken the especially the Muslim world by storm, because the Sacred City put into a documentary what Quranic geography put in print.
That's right.
And then, because that went so viral, many Muslims, for the first time, started to take him seriously. And because of that video, and this is why we do videos, isn't it? That's why we find videos get you much more, much bigger audience than writing books. Nothing against books, but the problem with books is they go out of date the day you've written it.
Correct.
Whereas with documentaries, you can take it, put it in a vehicle that people can understand it, they can wrestle with it, they can see it visually, you can then see everything that you're trying to say, and then they need to come to conclusions. Well, they did come to conclusions, and they had an awful lot of questions about these qiblas, these direction of prayers. So back in 2017, 2 years ago, he then came out early Islamic Qiblas, which is the one that we unpacked last year. Really, we went and we did the early Islamic Qibla material more than anything else.
Right.
Now, since that, there have been other problems that have come up, and that's the great thing. You get a reaction, you get responses. So what I'd like to do is I would like to start with that first Nabatean book. Let's go ahead and ask, who were these Nabateans? And let's go ahead and unpack what he found. Now, the Nabateans are listen, historically, everybody knows who the Nabateans are. The Nabateans were this group of people. They didn't have a kingdom per se. They were in the north, much further north than Arabia, and they were known and they were used by the Romans. The Romans used the Nabateans because they found them to be such great merchants.
Right.
And we know that the Romans didn't call them Nabateans, they called them Arabs, just straight Arabs. Josephus goes a step further, the Jewish historian who's writing in the 2nd century. He refers to these people as descendants of Nabajoth, Nabajoth. Could be Nabajoth, and usually it's a silent J, so it's Nabajoth, one of the sons of Ishmael. And that's why Josephus started this tradition that these Nabateans were from the line of Ishmael.
Right.
That's why you do get the reference to people called Ishmaelites and Hagarines.
Right.
Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar, the Arab, interesting in that it says the Arab in Galatians 4. Paul refers to her as
Correct.
an Arab from Arabia, and she is the slave woman of Sarah, who then is one who births Ishmael for Abraham so that he could have a son. That's the reason why their descendants refer to them as that. Now, there were references of these Nabateans as far away as Mesopotamia. So they were spread out. Now, Mesopotamia is where Iraq is today.
Correct.
And Iran. That's Mesopotamia. So they're in the
land
east.
between the two rivers.
That's right. The Euphrates and the Tigris.
Right.
But it was fascinating. In Italy, the Nabateans are known of. There is references to them in Egypt and Turkey and the Arabian Peninsula. All of these countries today, these Nabateans are well known, which is fascinating because that suggests, therefore, that they were spread out. They didn't have their own kingdom. They were spread out. So why were they so spread out? I'm going to throw these questions at you and see if you can guess. Why do you think they were spread out like this? What was going on here?
You mean the
Nabateans.
Why
were so many people knew about them?
Well, I mean, it appears that they were a strong dynasty, and they were probably very wealthy, and they were traders, maybe.
Traders.
Yeah.
Because they were merchants.
Yeah, that's right.
But they weren't just any kind of merchants. They were merchants who were very clever. They were merchants who adapted much better than anybody else. The big problem is when you look at the world, especially the Middle East, you have a huge desert. You have a desert not only in Arabia, but further south in Africa, you have another big desert, the Sahara. And one of the big problems with deserts is there's just no roads across them. The
Right.
Romans hadn't paved any roads, and if they did, the sands would have blown over them anyways.
Correct.
So the big difficulty was, how do you get goods over to Mesopotamia? How do you get goods over to not only to Mesopotamia, further even than that? How do you get them to India, and then how do you get them all the way to China? Actually, it's going this direction. I better make sure I'm looking at people who are looking at me this way. So I have to, actually, isn't that correct when you're on video? You have to go the opposite direction. So the east is here, the west is here. So here you have the Mediterranean world, you have the Byzantines, and you have the Arabs, the Nabateans, who are up in the north. How do you get all these goods going over here? How do the Turks get the goods over here? How did the Egyptians get goods going over here? They couldn't make it across the desert because they didn't have the means to go across these sands. So they went to the Nabateans. And the Nabateans had camels. The Nabateans were famous for camels. They could go across these deserts quite easily because they followed the stars. Hold that under your hat, or under, what do you call this?
Ghutra.
The utra. Hold that under your hutra, because you're going to find out that that's hugely important when we get to the Qibla problem. These people could go for days and days with no roads. They could go on shifting sands all the time because they used the stars. Dan knew this. He figured this out. Wow, no wonder they were so rich. No wonder they were so wealthy. But he also found one more thing. They were ingenious. And the reason why they were ingenious is because as they went to all these far across places way over in Mesopotamia, they were not Mesopotamian themselves. And they found that because they were foreigners coming from over in what is today Jordan and Palestine, as they went across the deserts and started trading with them, these people were jacking up the prices, huge prices. And that means that they had to take them across with, and they found the prices from the local people there. So they decided to send family members over to these cities to live outside the cities and to remain there as the caravans came back. They always sent some cousins and uncles to remain in every one of these major cities, Ctesiphon and other cities like that. And so they learned the local languages, but they also then found the prices starting to decrease. Once the caravans left, the prices went right back to the local prices they'd always use. These Nabateans then would buy it up at a cheaper rate. They would store it there. So when the next caravans came, guess who the Nabateans traded with? Not the local merchants.
They caravan and they sold it back to them.
They traded with their cousins.
That's right.
Who had bought it at a much cheaper rate and were selling it at a much cheaper rate.
Right.
So they could outprice anybody else that tried to get across the desert. So two things. They were great travelers. They understood the deserts better than anybody else. They had the camels that could do so. And they went local. They went and lived in situ there. And so they had families in every one of these cities, made the relationships with them, bought that when they were cheap, and then sold it even cheaper to their own cousins as they came across the deserts. Now, by doing that, you will find references to them by the Egyptians, the Italians, the Syrians, and the Turks, who could not cross the deserts because they didn't have that technology. They were then became dependent, including the Romans. They became dependent on the Nabateans. Because of that, you can see then that they created riches for themselves. They became very enriched. They undercut all the other prices of anybody else. No wonder that the Romans needed them. And more than that, they could not destroy them. They could not attack them. They could not assimilate them because the Nabateans became very proud.
Right.
Which makes sense. They became very proud, and they did have a religion of their own. They really only had a dialect. They had their own language. But they did have a capital, and the capital was in Medina Saleh.
Right.
If you look on a map, you can
Madain
see.
Saleh.
You've heard of it before.
Yeah, of course.
What do you know about it?
Well, it's known to be in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, and it's known to have those structures that are attributed to the Nabateans.
Okay, so what else do you know
their
about?
Their palaces engraved inside.
Okay, that's it. They were
in the
stone
mountains.
cutters.
Yes.
And the Medina Saleh but it was not a capital as in an empire capital. They were stone cutters, and what did they do with the stone? What were the cuttings in the stones for?
Houses, palaces,
No. Tombs.
Oh, okay.
These were tombs. What Dan Gibson found out was in Medina Saleh and in Petra and all these major cities that were there in what later became the Nabatean. These were the Nabateans. Every one of these were tombs because the one thing that the Nabateans could do, since they didn't have their own empire, since they were traders, they were living amongst all the other empires, and since they didn't have their own gods, they just took on the gods of wherever they were living.
Right.
The one thing they could do to keep their identity, to have their own identity, was to create these tombs that they would go on pilgrimages to every year. These were family tombs. So when you go to Medina Saleh and when you go to Petra, you will see there's different architecture in every one of these tombs. Some of the architecture is reflective of Egypt. Others is symptomatic of Turkey. Others is very much like Mesopotamia. They would always come back to these tombs and they would have pilgrimages. Fascinating. The pilgrimages they had even had names given to them. The great pilgrimage was called the Hajj. There's where the word Hajj comes from, that we now know in the Quran. The lesser pilgrimages was known as the Umrah. What is
Umrah.
Umrah? What is that?
Umrah is just a short pilgrim. I did it hundreds of times. You go, you circumvent around the Kaaba 7 times, and you go between the Safa and Marwa 7 times, and you pray in between, and that's about it. It's kind of like a very, very, very miniature form of Hajj. It's just a portion of the bigger Hajj.
So fascinating. These already have antecedents in Nabatean culture.
Right.
These were the but these were family privileges back to family tombs. They were in Medina Saleh and 2 or 3 other cities, but mainly in Medina Saleh and also in Petra. And that's why when you go to these cities, you will find Greek architecture in the columns in front of some of them. You'll find Roman architecture. You will find, in fact, this is a whole study of Mesopotamian architecture, and you'll find, in some cases, you will find Egyptian architecture. Now we can understand what's going on. If it had been one empire, they'd only have one form of architecture.
Right.
This proves that in order to create and retain their identity, they retain their identity as Nabateans by tombs. Can you now understand? That will come into play as we now start looking at the Qibla as far away as China and Cherman. Look and see why this was going on even before Islam came onto the world, this stage.
Absolutely, and that answers, by the way, one of the questions that we were asking you and I before about why there is a mosque in China that is almost the same date as if Muhammad was alive at that time.
You're right.
And your suggestion was that would have been a Nabatean tomb.
The Qiblatain, which is the
Nabatean temple, I should say.
Qiblatain mosque is one of those right there. You're right.
Yeah, you're right. Well, thank you, brother. As you can see, everybody, this is a very exciting and interesting material. And I assure you, this is cutting-edge material. You probably won't have access to such discussions about it outside of this. And we're always, of course, here to endorse the work of those who have labored into providing us with this material and information. So we encourage you to go and buy these books and have access to these sources. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, hit the bell so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/CIRA International. And together we can introduce Muslims to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you.